todos o casi todos trabajamos, bueno, todos trabajamos al final, porque
we all
otra
work.
cosa es que nos paguen o no nos
Sometimes
paguen,
we're paid or not, or higher or lower salary, but we all work.
Muy interesante la
And
ponencia de esta
therefore,
mañana.
this
Un
morning's
poco de presión
presentation
también, tengo que decir, cuando te dicen
was very
tantas cosas que
interesting,
hay
but
que hacer,
a little
uno
bit of
sale
pressure when you
con
get
un
to
poco
know
de,
all those
bueno,
things
de
that you should do.
Pero, por supuesto,
But
lo
of
que a
course,
todos nos interesa
what
es la
we're
salud,
all interested
es
in is
bueno,
health
mantenernos
and to
en forma y bueno, sabemos que a lo largo de los años, lo hablábamos ayer, ¿no? El deterioro que tiene que ocurrir, pero es verdad que puede haber factores que nos mantengan bueno, pues más activos, en mejor forma física, psicológica, social, etc. Y por eso no podíamos dejar de incluir en este encuentro un momento para hablar sobre el poder curativo del arte. Para ello tenemos con nosotros a la doctora Forgeard, profesora adjunta de Psicología Clínica
Deputy Professor of Clinical Psychology and also at the McLean Hospital. She analyzes well-being and recovery elements based on the strengths gained after stressful events, for example, adverse events and events related to mental health. She will speak about how art is healing. Secondly, Marian López Fernández,
profesora titular de la Universidad,
professor
de la Universidad Complutense de
Madrid, Complutense University,
acreditada, doctora en Bellas Artes,
has a chair, she's a
vicepresidenta del
doctor in fine
European
arts,
Consortium
vice
of
president
Arts
of the European Consortium of Arts Therapy Education, and her actions of research have been in social inclusion with migrant groups, refugees, people with risk of social exclusion and gender violence. She will speak about art therapy for human development. And without further ado, we give them the floor.
Hi everybody, it's a pleasure to be here. I want to start by thanking the Centro for inviting me. It's been a wonderful set of talks so far, and I'm very excited to tell you a little bit about my work in this area. I'm going to talk a little bit today about the healing power of the arts, and specifically about what we know about how art may exert therapeutic effects. So, most of my time now I spend teaching graduate students in clinical psychology at William James College, where I'm an assistant professor, and the rest of my time I spend doing research at McLean Hospital and the Harvard Medical School, where I also completed part of my training beforehand. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and so the talk today is going to talk specifically about the therapeutic powers of the arts for individuals who are experiencing significant difficulties. So this could be experiencing significant symptoms of things like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, or psychosis. And if you're a clinician, this talk is going to speak directly to you. But even if you're not a clinician, I would assume that you may be interacting with people who are experiencing significant difficulties quite often, whether it's in your work as a teacher, an educator, or perhaps at home with friends, with relatives, thinking about your own mental health. So I'm hoping that this talk is also going to be relevant for everybody. I want to talk a little bit about a question that somebody asked yesterday after Dr. Kaufman's talk, and the question of why there might be a connection between mental illness and creativity that people talk about a lot, often in the popular media, but also sometimes in academic papers as well. And there's multiple hypotheses about why some people have documented a connection. And one of the hypotheses that James mentioned is that maybe there isn't a connection at all. Maybe we've been wrongly diagnosing people retroactively. It might also be that we are selectively picking examples from the past and applying our romantic theories, and in doing so thinking that there is a connection between mental illness and creativity. Another dominant hypothesis in the literature is that specific features of particular disorders, like bipolar disorder, might be useful for creativity. Let's say if you are thinking very quickly, if you have lots of energy, that could be helpful somehow. Another hypothesis is that perhaps if you engage in very frustrating creative work, that might be stressful and that might lower your well-being. I'm mentioning all of these hypotheses because I'm actually interested in yet a different one. The hypothesis that I'm interested in is that people who are experiencing significant difficulties might be really attracted by creative activities because they hold some type of healing power, some type of therapeutic effect. effect. And so the relationship between experiencing mental disorders and creativity, if it exists, might be accounted for by the fact that individuals with significant difficulties might self-select into participating in these activities because they might be helpful for them. So I wanted to comment on this really important question that always comes up when we think about the relationship between psychological disorders and creativity. Okay. So the first thing that I want to acknowledge is that a lot of excellent work has been done on this topic by individuals in the field of art therapy and clinical psychology. Many studies have documented that engaging in artistic activities can be helpful to relieve symptoms of various disorders, including depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, schizophrenia, and it can be helpful for a variety of populations and settings. So we found this to be helpful in outpatient settings, in hospitals, in prisons. So artistic activities can be used in a number of different settings successfully. They're usually offered as an augmentation to other forms of treatments, and people react very positively to them and typically find them helpful. One of the questions that I've wanted to investigate, in addition to figuring out whether or not using art can help improve treatment outcomes, is whether we can also understand how they do so. Right? So it's a slightly different question that's less focused on the outcomes, more focused on the processes. How might these activities be helpful? Why is it that engaging in artistic activities is something that people find therapeutic? There has actually already been some excellent work done on this topic in non-clinical populations, and also some, of course, in clinical populations as well, but a lot more remains to be done to understand how this works specifically for people who are experiencing significant symptoms. So there's multiple reasons why this question might be important, and you'll see why it relates to food, even though it might not seem like it does right now. The first reason is that if we understand how artistic activities might have therapeutic effects, we might be in a better position to maximize their benefits for everybody, right? And it might be that depending on how these activities are offered, they may be more or less helpful. If we can isolate really what is the important thing that's happening while people are creating art, we may be able to create artistic interventions that are more and more helpful for a wider and wider range of people. So if I was making a pitch to a pharmaceutical company, which thankfully I'm not, what I would say is we found the active ingredient and we can deliver it in a really, really potent manner. Well, we can actually do the same for artistic interventions. If we figure out how they work, we might be able to deliver them in a way that's most effective. So that's the first reason why this question is important. The second reason is that when we're investigating this question, one of the things that probably we'll find is that different things, different artistic activities, different ways of engaging with art might be more or less helpful for different people. There are going to be important individual differences. In the field of general psychotherapy research right now, we are turning to understand what personalized choices we can make for the people that we work with. So a lot of researchers are studying not just what psychotherapy works for everybody, but actually what therapy works for whom. And I believe we can also do the same with art. We can move towards actually thinking about what might be helpful for different individuals, not just based on their presenting problems, but also based on their backgrounds, their preferences, their passions. Now, a lot of clinicians are already doing this based on amazing expertise, and speaking to experienced art therapists is wonderful because they know how to do this. But for a lot of people who don't know how to do this, can we actually distill this into guidelines? Can we produce enough scientific evidence to guide the training of future clinical psychologists and art therapists to help them best personalize artistic interventions for people? So a lot of the work that I've done has been done at the Behavioral Health Partial Program at McLean Hospital, which is this lovely building here on a day where the weather was nice in Boston, which is not always the case. So this is a program that I've worked in for the past 5 years. It serves approximately 600 people per year, and all of them are coming to the program because they're experiencing very significant difficulties that prevent them from being able to function in their daily lives. So people come in with a variety of diagnoses. Most of them are experiencing a mood episode, either depression, sometimes mania. Most of them have at least one or more anxiety disorders. Many of them also have trauma or stress-related disorders or psychotic disorders and personality disorders. So really, it's a generalist program that serves a wide range of people. And people come in for 1 to 2 weeks of intensive treatment that's usually focused on acquiring short-term therapeutic skills drawn from cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavior therapy, which help with short-term stabilization. I do want to make a quick comment about the cultural context of mental health care in the United States. 1 to 2 weeks of intensive treatment is considered long, which I know in Europe can be different. So we have 2 weeks with people, and we need to make the best use of that. At the very end of the 2 weeks, we asked them to complete a survey. We asked them what was helpful, what was not helpful, and what would you suggest. And you know what? A large majority of people say, please, we want more opportunities to make art, right? This comment comes back again and again and again. So obviously we have to pay attention to that and try to figure out what it is that people are getting while they're making art, in addition to the other therapeutic activities that they're engaging in individual and group therapy, case management, etc. So in this program, people have the opportunity to engage in art making approximately 3 times per week. It's not a lot, but it's more than many programs might offer in the United States at least. And they're being given the opportunity for 45 minutes to essentially work on any art projects that they might be interested in. And I'll come back to this group in just a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the projects that I've conducted in this setting. So one that I've been very interested in recently is actually the period of time right after people leave the program, which usually feels to them like this. They've had intensive support for 2 weeks. They've gone to groups every day. They have a very clear structure. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, it's actually time for them to go home, go back to their lives. Maybe they'll have a few appointments per week, but that'll be it. And people in the literature, as well as people in this program, report this is very stressful. It's very anxiety-provoking to go back from having a lot of support to actually having very little support. So one of the studies that I conducted recently was looking at how people do during the weeks following discharge. And can we understand what are the factors that might be helpful in helping them sustain recovery? This is important because we actually know that the first 30 days after people leave an intensive program are the highest period of risk for relapse, both relapse in symptoms, relapse in suicidality. So we really want to understand what's going on after people leave. So in order to do that, I recruited 100 participants, and I asked them for 2 weeks after they left, every time you get notified on your phone, please complete some very brief surveys. So they received these surveys approximately 5 times per day, every 2 hours, and every 2 hours, they told me how stressed they felt, as well as who they were interacting with. What else did I ask them? I asked them specifically what skills they were using, and as part of that, I asked them, did you use creative self-expression in the past 2 hours? And what I found in the study, among other findings, was that when they reported engaging in creative self-expression, they also at the same time reported higher levels of positive affect, as well as lower levels of negative affect. And the data seem to suggest that it's bidirectional. So people are more likely to engage in creative self-expression when they're already feeling good, and engaging in creative activities also seems to be helpful for their mood afterwards. Of course, we also want them to potentially engage in activities when they're not feeling so well, so that's sort of a challenge that we also need to be able to think about. But this still doesn't really tell us how these activities might be helpful. Now we know, well, they might improve mood in daily life, but how might they be able to do so? I developed some hypotheses based on a literature review that I conducted, as well well as some qualitative interviews I did with artists and scientists a few years back. I'm mostly going to talk about some of the things I heard from artists that informed my thinking. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the processes that I think might be most helpful in this regard. Some of the processes that might help us understand how art may be helpful for individuals dealing with a wide range of difficulties. The first process is that engaging in artistic activities may simply be something that activates people, something that gives them energy, something that allows them to engage in something concrete. Oftentimes, when someone is not feeling well, they may not really feel like doing anything at all. Asking people to engage in an artistic activity helps them do something that's very concrete and do something that allows them sometimes to go out of their home to buy supplies or just at home get up from their bed and actually do something. And we know, for example, that for something like depression, this is one of the best treatments we have, progressively helping people re-engage in activities so they can find what sources of satisfaction still exist for them and gradually recover. So that's one process. And this is what somebody that I interviewed said about this. I engage in art because it makes me feel better physically. The person might as well have been describing exercising, right? But they were describing engaging with art. A second process that I'm very interested in is self-efficacy. Now, I love taking instant pictures. The only problem with that is that the paper is a little bit expensive, but I love the feeling of pressing the button and getting a product quickly that's something that I made that represents something that I care about. My 3-year-old also loves it, so it's a family activity, simple, it allows us to make something. Self-efficacy is the feeling that you can accomplish your goals, you can create something, and in the process of that, you can deal with obstacles and challenges effectively. Self-efficacy is also very interesting because it comes in different flavors. So engaging in art might both increase general self-efficacy, which is our general feeling about being able to accomplish our goals and deal with obstacles. It can also potentially increase creative self-efficacy, which is how we think about our own ability to come up with novel and useful ideas or products. So it's self-efficacy specifically applied to the creative process. And contrasting those both forms of self-efficacy may be very interesting because it may help us figure out whether the benefits of artistic activities are general benefits that we might get from other types of activities, or whether they're also more specific to something that has to do with creative behavior specifically. So for that reason, I've been very interested in this process. So this is how an artist describes this. I like the feeling of coming up with something that is truly my own, right? A lot of the time we're working on things that are not going to truly be our own. Creating something artistically provides us with a sense of ownership, provides us with a sense of accomplishment. Another process I've been interested in is the process of meaning making, which has a large literature that goes beyond the artistic literature. But it's this idea that when we go through very difficult experiences, being offered an opportunity to actually process those, make sense of things that are complicated, difficult, that might feel unfair, is something that requires time and something that might be very helpful. As part of this, one of the things that was mentioned yesterday is I have an interest specifically in understanding how people may use artistic activities following major adverse events or traumatic events in order to recover, and also whether people who are higher in creative abilities to begin with might be able to use this as a resource to cope with such events. So one artist in the qualitative study I conducted said, I engage in art because it allows me to capture or try to capture the complexity of reality. The hardships people experience, the difficulties they experience might be really hard to communicate in words or in other ways, and art might provide a way to really explore and understand and make sense of those in a safe way. I engage in art because it helps me deal with difficult experiences. It's a simple idea, but there are not a ton of ways in which people feel safe approaching very difficult past experiences. So this is important. A process that also seems quite interesting and ripe for future research is whether art may help people practice mindfulness. So mindfulness is defined as paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And when we ask people to engage in art, or when we ourselves engage in art, what we do is we decide, for a moment, I'm going to spend time focusing on this process that I'm involved in. And so the process of actually training our attention on the specific activity might actually be very helpful. I'm not going to talk too much about distraction today, but this is a little bit related to distraction. By using mindfulness, we can decide to turn our thoughts away from specific experiences that might be distressing to redirect them towards something that is engaging. So one artist said, I engage in art because it focuses me. And another thing art might do is it might provide us with a sense of social connectedness. Of course, that's going to be most relevant if people are participating in some type of art group where there are other people present. But even when people are creating on their own, they might be thinking about who would be interested in this? Who am I going to share this with? Can this be a basis for exchange or conversation? So I engage in art because it helps me feel like I belong to a larger community. There's also a sense of identity there, where perhaps by having people engage in art, they start thinking of themselves as artists and think about all the other people who identify in the same way. Okay, so coming back to this program here to tell you a little bit about how I've applied those ideas. This is actually the room where individuals engage in creative, artistic self-expression groups. It's a pretty simple room, really. We have a table, some chairs, and then we have some basic supplies. Most people engage in coloring, drawing, painting, but they have access to a somewhat larger range of things as well. They can do jewelry making, origami, they can write. It's really very flexible. So they have 3 hours a week where they can do this under with the guidance of a counselor or a psychologist or someone else. So I did a study where I looked at the experiences of 175 individuals who participated in these groups because I was specifically interested in documenting in such a real-world naturalistic settings what are some of the benefits that people are reporting. So the first thing that I found, which was not surprising, is that people reported an increase in positive affect and a decrease in negative affect over the course of the group. That was reassuring, that was what I expected, and it was pretty clear there that this is what was happening for people. But then I was interested in some of these other processes as well, and I selected the ones that I thought might be most relevant for this group at that time. And so I also found that people reported increases in general self-efficacy during the group, increases in creative self-efficacy specifically during the group, activation, mindfulness, and also social connectedness, right? So throughout all of these different processes, people reported improvements in everything, which is encouraging, but also suggests there might be a bit of a positivity bias when you ask people to report something before and after a group. They may tend to sort of endorse higher scores at the end. Nonetheless, I think these findings reflect something about what people experienced during the group. But one of the things that I was interested then in better understanding was whether some of these specific processes were more closely tied to changes in affect than other ones, right? So what are the specific benefits that might be most closely associated with also experiencing improvements in mood? If you just look at direct bivariate correlations, you're actually going to find that all of the processes on the left are going to be associated with improvements in affect. But when you test for relationships between these processes controlling for each other, what you actually find is the following. You find that increases in general self-efficacy were related to improvements in positive mood as well as improvements in negative mood, right? So that general sense of accomplishment, of feeling like you're able to do something, even if it's a short project within 45 minutes, was something that seemed especially helpful. And mindfulness also specifically was related to increases in positive mood. So what this suggests, and this is still preliminary, is that these two processes might be particularly helpful for mood improvements. And that needs to be tested in future studies as well, because actually demonstrating that a particular variable is responsible for improvements is something that takes multiple studies and very specific research designs. So this is preliminary, but it's encouraging and interesting. The fact that general self-efficacy was more closely associated to improvements in mood than creative self-efficacy suggests that the benefits of artistic activities may be explained by general processes, which is okay. It just means that perhaps artistic activities are just really good at doing this and doing something that might be similar to some other activities that people might engage in, like sports or something else. Okay, so I want to end here by talking a little bit about how art can be integrated with treatments, because at this point in time, in the field of clinical psychology, we're moving towards suggesting that some treatments are very helpful for a wide range of difficulties. And I think that there are lots of great opportunities to be able to integrate artistic activities within these treatments. And if you actually read treatment manuals, they will usually hand wave at art somewhere. They will say, oh, you could do this using art. But then they sort of leave you to figure out exactly how to do it, right? And I think we need more collaborations between art therapists and psychologists and other mental health professionals in order to figure out how to do it in a way that is most effective, and in order to also get people who maybe are not as aware of the benefits of artistic activities to also be interested in using those, because a lot of the clients or patients that we work with are going to be very receptive. I want to talk a little bit about Robert, not his real name, who's a person that I worked with several years ago as part of this program. So this was a 60-year-old man, approximately, who was experiencing an episode of major depression, really was having trouble engaging in any sort of activity, right? It was very hard to get out of bed, though he was making it to the program, but it was very hard to do anything after he had retired and lost his wife. So when I asked him to engage in a number of activities to kind of get him going, get him activated, I quickly noticed that it was at this point in time just very, very hard for him. We talked a little bit about his interests, and I discovered that he loved hiking, that had really been a great source of meaning for him in the past. But right now he was feeling too out of shape. It just felt too difficult to drive somewhere, take his car, and go for a walk. But I asked him, well, tell me about one of your favorite hikes. Where was it? What were you doing? And he talked about walking up an uphill path on a little mountain and how beautiful it was, and how he did it multiple times. He did it when it was raining, he did it when it was snowing, he did it when it was really sunny and warm, he did it at all times, right, when in the past. He wasn't able to do it anymore. But what I asked him to do was, well, can you please draw yourself and draw this mountain, draw this place that has such meaning for you? And this is not his actual drawing, but it looked something like this, right? So the path, the weather, this is what this meaningful place is like for me. And then I asked him to actually do a mindfulness exercise for me, which is a component of several empirically supported treatments for depression. So you're on this path, right? Tell me about what's happening. And then now I'm going to ask you to, for a moment, be mindful of the thoughts and feelings that come up in the moment. So we're going to be silent. Maybe we're even going to close our eyes. And every time a thought comes up, well, I'm going to ask you to represent it in some form here as the weather. So maybe you're going to draw a raindrop every time you have a painful thought or critical thought that comes up. Maybe if a really painful thought comes up, draw some thunder, whatever you need to represent what internal experiences you're experiencing right now. And so he did that, and in doing that, we were able to actually get closer to the internal experiences that were preventing him from re-engaging in life. And we were able to use art as a way to practice mindfulness. And prior to that, he had said, that's too hard for me. Mindfulness, meditation, I can't do it. It's too distressing. I have too many thoughts that are coming up for me. But using art to do it was a way that was more accessible for him, in a way that was more engaging and that reconnected him with the things that he loved. So there's lots of actually good work being done now on integrating art with different forms of treatment. I'm going to highlight a few of them right now. Some people have published some excellent books on art therapy informed by various modalities. So one of them is DBT-informed art therapy. Dialectical behavior therapy is a treatment that was developed specifically for individuals who engage in self-harm, suicidal behaviors, or have difficulties with impulsivity across a wide range of diagnoses. And using art in that modality might be very effective to help people accept or be mindful of very painful experiences and then make choices and use skills that might be helpful for them moving forward. But it's also been applied to things like attachment therapy, so how to form healthy relationships with others, how to perhaps repair some things that were hard in relationships from the past, and using art as a way to do that. And then in cognitive behavioral therapy, there are lots of exercises that people can actually do also to apply some concepts that might seem a little bit concrete, abstract, and actually do something. That there's much more that we can do also in the future in that regard. So on that note, I just want to offer a little summary of all the things that I've talked about today. I tried to use pictures as much as possible, but I also know verbal summaries are helpful. So there's a large and growing body of literature that has documented that artistic activities have therapeutic benefits for a wide range of problems, and more research is needed to really understand how they might be able to do this. So today I presented some preliminary research about what might be helpful, and I talked about a number of different processes that are worthy of future investigation. So those include changes in activation, self-efficacy, mindfulness, meaning-making, and social connectedness. There are others as well, and I'm very excited that other people might be interested in enlarging our ideas about what might be helpful about artistic activities. Art's a very engaging and flexible modality that we can use in very versatile ways, so we should try to really make the most out of it so we can engage a wide range of people, especially people who might have more trouble engaging verbally. We often talk about art being helpful for children, older individuals, individuals with disabilities, but a lot of us have trouble expressing what's going on with us verbally, and so the benefits of art are applicable across a wide range of populations. And one thing we can do is to use this scholarship to further inform psychotherapy research and how to personalize the therapy process. Now, I believe we could study other creative activities besides arts. I have not yet offered scientific mathematics groups in hospital settings. I actually don't think that would work. Art is one modality. My talk reflected a little bit of what's called the art bias in creativity research. I do think that it's a great example of how we can use the creative process potentially to help people, but there might be other creative activities as well that might be helpful. All right, on that note, I want to thank the staff and the patients at the Behavioral Health Partial Program, the Centro again for inviting me, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Buenos días. Voy a hablar en castellano.
Hello, I'm going to be speaking in Spanish. Well, I brought the presentation in English, and we are going to combine a little bit more things. First of all, I would like to thank the Botín Foundation for inviting me to this conference. I think I represent a team who has been working for nearly 20 years at the Complutense University in my research team, and I'm their representative, and I thank also on behalf of the university. Well, I don't know if art heals, and in any case, we should define what healing is. What I'm going to do during these 20 minutes, more or less, is to talk a little bit about part of the history of art therapy that us from the Complutense University, we started working with it in 2000 with a master's degree, and I would like to talk about some key elements. I'm going to talk about Margaret Lambergut, Ellen Panayake, Kramer, who talked about the possibilities of art from the anthropological point of view, also from the educational point of view, some data about neuroscience, who has agreed, given us, has agreed with us, the people who worked in art therapy. We were saying that the creators were good for the development of human beings and for the development of society in general. And afterwards, I will talk about the heart, or about how we work using art therapy, which are key inflection points, turning points regarding art and the person we are working with, and the relationship in this type of circle between the person and the art. And if I have time, we'll see a video of the work we developed a couple of years ago with museums. We work very closely with museums because we think that museums are empathic places and places where you can work art therapy. And lastly, I will mention the work we are working on right now. Well, this is a chronology between the Spanish Civil War and the last things we are doing. The European Consortium of Art Therapies and Education started in 1991, and I'm the vice president, and it includes 32 European universities that have a doctorate in art therapy. I think it's important to point out two elements, two key moments, 36 and 42, during the Spanish Civil War and Second World War, because among other things, they were working with children during the war. This is very important. It's the baseline of art therapy in Europe. Victor Ullmann, he was a musician who was in the Terezin ghetto in Czechoslovakia, and he worked with children at the ghetto, composing music and composing an opera, the Die Brundibald, who they presented in 1938. He said that the capacity to create is parallel to the capacity to survive. When one stops creating in the broader sense, they are leaving themselves die. If we try, with the people we're working with, to have this creative drive, they are working towards life, and that's what they did during these years. They still draw. This is a catalogue that Aldous Huxley prologue, when they collected the drawings made by children in the Republican colonies. The Quakers collected these drawings and were taken in the 1938 for an exhibition to collect money for the children who were starving in Spain. Here you have the little catalogue that they made. They still draw pictures. And to hurry up, between 1936 and 1937, the Republican administration took out the majority of the children that were in the cities that were being bombarded in Madrid and Barcelona, and they took them to the areas where there weren't any bombardments, and mainly outside of Spain. They took away more than 15,000 children to the colonies to make them safe and to protect them from death. And part of the work that the teachers developed were big specialists working with children. They separated. These children are taken away in trains from one day to another. The parents don't even know where they're going. They are traumatized. And what they did a work based in art, in many cases. In art and in body expression, in recovering the capacity of feeling strong, or feeling safe, of empowerment. And in drawings, and in the act of drawing itself, more than in the drawings, that's why I want to focus mainly on the process and not on the products. I want to focus on what the creative process does, to help these children digest what they were going through. The teachers of the pedagogical missions, as many of the artists did afterwards in Tercin, they worked with art as a structural element. This means that people who isn't related with the artist, they say that art serves to take everything away. No, but it isn't that way. Art is an organizing activity. We work with up, down, left, right, selecting colors. There are elements that help us exteriorize what we have inside in a fragmented way, and it organizes it. And one of the elements that was most positive in this work with children, they were more traumatized by being separated from their parents than from the war. Even if they saw things that no children should see. This helped them understand and organize and explain something they didn't control. Art and the creative process, it's a way of controlling our body, our ideas, and helps us exteriorize and tell what we feel. Helen Beckett said that it's the pen is better than the pill. So let's write about a story, as Brunner said, Brunner. Let's work on our autobiography to give sense to what's happening to us, to introduce what's happening to us into a narrative. There's a wonderful documentary. All these drawings were discovered 15-20 years ago because they were kept in the architecture library of Washington, and 20 years ago, more or less, they started being studied. There's a documentary called "The War Drawn." In the documentary, they were looking for the authors of the drawings, and they remember the day and the moment they drew those drawings when they were 6, 7, 8 years old. What subjects they tackled? Life before the war. One of the elements we worked with when we work with trauma. Life shouldn't be trauma. It's a part of life. It's something that has happened in our life, not our life. So the drawing of things that happen in our house, the parties, the normal things that happen before the traumatic situation are very important and it's important to introduce this element, that traumatic element, that it's something that has happened to us, but it's not the only thing that has happened to us. They needed to work with the Lebenswelt, that's something that blows into pieces, so they can structure it outside their body, which has been attacked. And also the life in the colonies and an element of emotional regulation and cognitive regulation. You will see in many of the images, well, they reflect what was life. There's a queue for the milk, and there are planes, there's a bombardment all of a sudden, and it's a reflect of something that has happened, and children have no control over things. We don't ask them about the decisions we take, even less in this kind of situations. So all of the sudden, the children can choose, they can decide, they can put things outside them and have control over something they didn't control. And they structure and they tell, they explain how they go to the refuge, how they close their eyes because they don't want to see what's going on around them. This is a self-portrait where she doesn't want to see what's going on. It's paradoxical that you say what don't you want to say. It's a way of talking about it, to assume it, to elaborate it, to integrate it. In Teresin, Frederick Van Dijks, who's an artist and a designer who had studied in the Bauhaus school, so the pedagogical methods were focused on less on therapy. She arrived to Teresin and she tried to work with children. She was placed in the design department, and she said that she wanted to be with the children, and she made a huge work, and she wrote a wonderful text about artistic education, which is the base mainly of our therapies. One of the sentence, one of the most interesting sentence of Frederick Van Dijks, who died in Auschwitz in 1945, is that aesthetics is just another thinner skin protection against chaos. Dicker Van Dijks, I'm sorry because some of the images are not very, the quality of the images is not very good. Well, her work is related to the work before the war. When they were at home with their parents and grandchildren, everything was calmed. There are other images related to the arrival to Teresin, to the ghetto of Teresin, and others with very traumatic events, and others have to do with imagination. And in those images, Dicker Van Dijks, what she does is working with mindfulness. She's not aware, but they are not aware about that. These were children who had seen how their parents got killed, and she focused them. She tells them what they have to draw. She works with Bauhaus techniques, with less is more, let's focus on the color and less on the line. She makes them write their name because their name had been taken away. So they record their identity, drawing and writing their name a thousand times. They recover the control over themselves and over what's happening to them, which are out of their control, but symbolically, through drawing, they recover it. And she tries that life in the ghetto can be structured somehow, like a comic. There's a before, during, and after. Even if I don't have the control, I have the control in the drawing, even if it's symbolically. Dicker Van Dijks died in Auschwitz, but she left more than 2,500 drawings, poems, songs made by the children. They were left in a box, and those works were recovered, and you can consult them in the internet. It's also very, very interesting. Part of the advices she writes about how to work with children who arrive in the state they arrive to the Thessalonian ghetto. One of the elements she mentions is that we don't need to mistake education of vulnerable children with charity. Not all the drawings of the children are good, and you have to tell them. And with this, I joined with this idea of affective intonation or disintonation. Loving children doesn't mean to tell them yes to everything. They have to make responsible of their capacities to choose. Silvia Bonino says that it's a primary safety, ontological safety. They have to be responsible of their acts. We are good, but sometimes we make wrong things, which is there's a very big difference between our acts being incorrect and making things incorrect. This is something that one of the other speakers mentioned. I think Ronnie mentioned it. And they worked with imagination, and they worked with the possibility of a future, how the future is going to be, because art and the creative process throws us into the future. The creative process works, as Sector Fiorini says, between the given and the possible. It's a territory of uncertainty, and this uncertainty territory that, as Sartre said, can be anguishing, but also provides freedom. And this is what art therapy does. We work with painful events, a loss, a disease, a catastrophe. Anything can happen. It's a territory of uncertainty, of something that you can foresee. That's the process of the creative process, and that's why it's hopeful. It gives us hope in the future. Hannah Arendt said that something like the art is the immortal place of the mortals. It's the only thing that we can maintain, and it's the first drawing, the first mark children makes on the wall on our house, and it's something that they leave there, that print their presence, and they go and they come back, and it's there, and there's their presence, and art works with that. It's we are present through our art. Another element that I find very interesting, it's part of what Ellen de Sanayake, an anthropologist, developed. She doesn't talk about it she doesn't say it's art. She says that we do things in a special way. We set the table in a special way. We make a nest. We make a cradle in a special way. We bury our dead in a special way. And that special factor has to do with aesthetics. Everything that we do in a special manner, it's related on the one hand with the need of harmony and equilibrium, and also, as Maribel said, it has to do with the relationship. The creative process, it's always about linking, bonding. We don't do things for ourselves. We do it for ourselves, but we show it and we share it. And that's why it's related with the relationship. And Ellen de Sanayake, she worked with the difference and the relationship of game, rituals and art. And she points out that art is related with games. Donald Winnicott, who is one of our references in our therapy, says that the space of art is the space of game. It's a potential space. It's a safety space where we have freedom, a space where everything can be done within certain rules, but we can play to be someone else. We can play to be not the beaten down children. We can be the contrary, and they play with these limits. And art is related to this because it works in the same space. It occupies the same space. It's a symbolic space between ourselves and the world. Culture is that potential space and symbolic space. And one of the things that Ellen de Sanayake says is that maybe art is useless, but everyone has been doing it for 100,000 years by all the civilizations. So, therefore, there must be some use for it, and if we talked about adaptive capacities, all the civilizations have danced, they have sung, they have left a print on a stone, in a desert, in their own bodies, on their own bodies. So art has to have some practical use. If it didn't, the civilizations and cultures who are looking for, who only look to be fed and to sleep, they wouldn't waste their time doing art. The last discoveries that we have in Atapuerca, in Burgos, for example, I recommend you to go. There's a museum of human evolution. They have discovered that Homo sapiens developed through their symbolic capacity. their capacity of making art. In some way, we could be able to measure why Neanderthals disappeared and Homo sapiens survived. It was because of their capacity of finding solutions, useful solutions. They didn't need to be new, but they need to be new for the person that found those solutions.
That is to say, in this regard, one of the things mentioned by Elisa Nayake is that it reduces the effects of critical times, and they have to do with rituals, dance, music, and some others. It gives a feeling of collective belonging. If you're going to go dancing, and I always urge you to do so, when we dance together, we feel more united. We feel we belong, and it also works on the body. Another element that I wanted to highlight is the work, I like it, especially by Bruno Bettelheim. He reinforces the importance of art in education because it's a place of freedom, but also of responsibility. It's not a place where everybody can do what they wish. It's a place of freedom, but also of responsibility, where actions and choices we make have to be coherent because you're making something. And they say that in other types of education, they have to deny chaos, they should repress chaos. It's only in art classes where we expect the students to be free and express their own view of life, and that's a responsibility. So it's not only freedom, but it's freedom with responsibility and coherence, and this is what we should be all doing in life. So art helps the organized expression and the elaboration of internal impulses. Art encourages freedom, and we have the responsibility to build oneself. Art raises aesthetic awareness, and it presents an alternative view of life, and that's performing theater, for example, performing different roles, that as Herbert Marcus said. And just a very fast summary of neuroscientific functions and neuroscience. And after Descartes' mistake, based on Antonio Damas' books, he and his wife, they made an interesting work. They were awarded with the Príncipe de Asturias. It's true that both hemispheres are connected through the callus corpus or body, but one of the evidences that reinforces the possibilities of art therapy is that art, imagination, smell, senses, they work more with the right brain functions and poetry, while the left work with discursive speech. What happens with trauma? People lose their speech ability. The Broca area is blocked in the left lobe, and they cannot express what happened to them because the neuronal synapses are broken. Although people go on having nightmares, art therapy do not only work through a creative process, but then you have to speak about it, and that's what Dicker van Dyke highlighted. Children will draw, but then they will explain, they will describe their drawings. So we work from the left, from the right brain symbols, and then we go back to the left one and explain what happened while we were in this creative process. What did we feel? Were we ashamed? Were we fearful? How did we feel? So we go back working this assimilation process that Piaget presented. Obviously, when we are teaching boys and girls and our pupils at the university, when we're teaching them how to think, we seem to be asking for cognitive skills, but nobody is able to do a research study. They don't have confidence in themselves. They would never dare to say anything novel. And if they are not intellectually humble, they will not be able to see their own shortcomings. So emotional and everything related to the affect have an impact on their scientific performance. Even the most positivistic one, we should trust ourselves, but we should also be able to acknowledge that we may be gender biased, class biased, because this will have an impact in our research study, and all those aspects that have to do with humbleness, courage, are also included in, or should be included in the youngest education. And I conclude with this. We work linking all those elements. A safe space. We cannot work otherwise. It's the Winnicott space that highlights a space where we do not judge, where we try to reopen an affect relation and a trusted relation with the people we're working with. Our therapy has to take an exquisite care of the other, respectful, caring, and focus. We accompany in the symbols, in the symbols creation that they do. So we talk about this potential space where something might arise and where transformations can take place, psychical and personal ones. And we just make this possible. How? Working with the work of art, with the participant and the art therapist, with the transferential and counter-transferential relations. What do the participants see in us? A mother, somebody to hate, somebody to love, somebody that will help them. They see a representation of the hospital, the institution. Sometimes we have to stand. What do participants see in their work? What is the projection of the work of art? And how can we help this work of art to be for the participant just another element of their life, an element that opens up new possibilities? So we are like a mirror so that the participant can do their own interpretation. We never interpret anything. We accompany the participants to do their own interpretation within this potential space. And they are always longer interventions. Thank you very much.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias. Después de tanta información interesante.
Thank you so much. And after all this interesting information, I wanted to tell you that connecting this to the poster session, that after we will have a couple of questions, 2-3 questions, because questions are important, and there is a proposal. We consider the benefits of art are so important in helping us feeling better. We from the Centro Botín want to explore this with a research study that is a work in progress. I believe Christopher Clauder is here. I don't see Lourdes Escobar. Yes, hello Lourdes. And also a team of professionals from the Marqués de Valdecilla Hospital in Santander. We are working, and so please take a look of this poster. It's not only the benefits for patients, for people that are undergoing difficult situations. Our idea is to work with healthcare professionals themselves, trying the professionals to develop their own creative capacity, their own emotional skills and abilities in order to provide better care in the complicated situations that you can live in the healthcare environment. And so from here I would also like to thank them for their excellent work. So let's go to the questions.
A lot lot of places that are delivering care to individuals with various types of mental illnesses are stopping to deliver services based on art and art therapy because these have sometimes been described as pseudo-therapies. And so the question is, what do I think about this? So first of all, I want to agree with the person who's writing this question that this is something that's happening in the world. It's certainly happening in the United States. And in fact, in the hospital where I work, there used to be a whole center for art therapists, and now we only have a few art therapists. So the financial pressures have been such that people have decided that this was one of the areas where there would be less investment, which is a real shame, right? So my opinion on this is that we have enough evidence that unless you haven't read the research on this, you wouldn't know, right, that these are not pseudotherapies. I put up a whole slide with lots of references that actually suggest that art has a wide range of benefits for a lot of different people. But I think part of the problem is that we have different literatures that are not talking to each other enough. So the clinical psychologists usually have not read the art therapy literature, which is a shame. And I think that if they can work together to actually further the research on the topic, we're going to get to a place where everybody's sort of understanding the strength of art-based approaches. So I agree with the person who asked the question, and I'm hoping that we can provide solutions by helping a wider range of people understand the potential benefits of art.
Thank you. ¿Cuánto dura el efecto positivo de una actividad artística?
How long does it last?
¿Una actividad puntual?
Positive effect of an artistic activity. Does it make sense just to stand-alone activity? We, in general, when we work in art therapy workshops, we work for a minimum of 30-40 hours in a long period of time. So if we're working, I've been working not so long ago at Valdemoro prison from December to May. So not only did we go 2 hours a week, but even more. I like this way of working. I believe transformations are possible in a long therapeutical time, but we also work at La Paz Hospital at the pediatrics where children, they are just 1 or 2 weeks in the hospital. So sometimes we work with what we have, and it's just one single session. We work the area of fear, anxiety before surgery. We work with doctors, and we work with it's just one session, and we work, and sometimes if we can, we work for a longer period. And I repeat, I like longer therapeutical processes. Estoy de acuerdo.
Ideally, when we can use more time, it's so helpful, especially for the process of meaning making. How do we make sense of things that are happening to us? It takes more than one session. But in a lot of contexts, like pediatric wards that you were talking about, when we only have one session, there are still some very important things that we can do. And even in short formats, if we can help people understand also for themselves what they're getting out of the activity, they might be able to take that outside of the therapy room and do some of that on their own as well. So both short-term and long-terms have benefits, but long-term treatment obviously can be really, really helpful.
How do you benefit from the therapeutical potential of arts at school or teachers so they can benefit to take care of the students' emotions?
Dándoles más tiempo.
Giving them more time. Giving them more time. Our country thinks artistic education as an illness to be eradicated. So it has to do with this positivist thought or focus on immediate efficiency. And I believe that the countries that provide more artistic education for their children, they always have better results, as we have seen. I believe that we could do a lot. In fact, in our next project, we will work with teachers to see not only art education as something that will create beautiful objects, but the creative process itself and how it has an impact on the development of human beings. And I believe we can work beautifully with teachers, and it'll be great if we can integrate this at the schoolrooms and work it in an interdisciplinary way, not working in silos or isolation, but how can we work in interdisciplinary manner with all.
Less time for arts in schools, so that's happening in the United States where I live. It's also happening in France where I'm from, in Spain as well. And I think the last point that you made about integrating the arts with the other things that we're doing is very important. So just like we can integrate it in treatment, we can integrate it in education, so it doesn't feel like this separate thing that people have to learn about and do, but it actually is a tool that you can use in order to teach other things, to teach history, teach physics, etc. There's lots of excellent ways that this can be applied, and with some training and with some interdisciplinary work, it can be done in a very effective way.
We have time for one last question.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. And I think it relates a little bit to Dr. Vartanyan's talk yesterday about what parts of the brain are involved in the creative process. So I'm thinking, for example, about the difference between the parts of the brain that are responsible for idea generation, so the default mode network, and the parts of the brain that are responsible for executive control and oftentimes processes involved in sort of evaluating ideas. And a lot of these parts of the brain sometimes can be overactive if people are sort of overthinking or trying to control a lot of things that they're worried about. It might be that engaging in artistic activities is actually something that helps relax those controlling parts of the brain and actually engage these other parts. So I do think that part of what might be helpful about the artistic process is in fact to sort of redirect how the brain is working in the moment. But we certainly need a lot more work on the topic. The neuroscience of creativity has focused a lot on how the brain works for creative performers, but we don't know yet exactly how that plays out for people who are using creative activities for therapeutic purposes.
Bueno, pues yo creo que es el momento para ir a tomar un café.
I believe it's now the right time for a cup of coffee. Thank you.